This
Program Committee.
conference will now be recorded.
I'm the chairperson of the Joint Program Committee that creates the programming for both the Hopewell Valley Historical Society and the Hopewell Museum, and I serve on both boards. I'm very pleased to once again be able to partner with our friends at the Hopewell Township branch of the Mercer County Library. We are always grateful to have a partnership with other local organizations that have an interest in our community's history. We are thrilled to have the ability to continue to share these programs with the public, even though we cannot meet in person just yet. Through the use of virtual tools like GoToMeeting and Zoom, we have found a much broader audience that is interested in our topics, and we are thrilled to offer these programs free to the public. However, we do depend on your generous donations and memberships, so please be sure to check out the Hopewell Valley Historical Society's website at www.hopewellvalleyhistory.org or our Hopewell Museum website at thehopewellmuseum.org. To keep up to date on the monthly programs that we offer, make an online donation to either organization. You can also join the Hopewell Valley Historical Society for an annual membership and receive a year-long subscription of our well-researched newsletters. You may also be aware of our partnership in the Hopewell Valley Heritage Week events that are starting this Saturday. There are many events spanning from Saturday, May 22nd through Monday, May 31st. And we have several other local organizations that are partnering on this event. Be sure to look for all of the upcoming activities on the Hopewell Museum's website under Hopewell Valley Heritage Week, and then select HVHW events. Thanks once again for joining, and thank you, Anna, for helping to organize this.
Thank you, Bob. I just want to also say that at the Mercer County Library System, the Hopewell Township branch, very much appreciates the partnership with the Hopewell Valley Historical Society as well as the Hopewell Museum. We feel that it's a benefit to the community at large, being able to reach out and share the history and knowledge of our area. As Bob said, my name is Anna. I'm Anna Vanskoik. I work at the Hopewell Township branch, and I do want to encourage you to look at the programs that are coming up. Heritage Week, and one of the programs that we're offering is on Tuesday, May 25th at 7 o'clock. It's Washington's Crossing, the Rest of the Story, and it talks about
I think we lost you, Anna.
My mute button got hit. Sorry about that. Also on Thursday, May 27th at 7 p.m., we have a program on gerrymandering and redistricting in New Jersey. So I do encourage you, just along with those Hopewell sites that Bob had mentioned, that you look at the Mercer County Library's website, mcl.org. Now, let's get on to the meat of the program. Tonight, we have artist, photographer, and collector, Jerry Pevahouse. He ran a computer consulting company, Cranberry Micro Support Incorporated of Cranberry, New Jersey, from 1990 until 2018. Jerry was a museum curator for the Cranberry Historical Society and researched Cranberry Civil War history, which is now part of the New Jersey State Archives reference collection. He is a longtime collector of antique bottles, and he has comprehensively researched the history of the bottling industry of Trenton, New Jersey. I think our attendees are in for quite a treat this evening. Jerry shares his extensive knowledge of not only the industry and its products, but also the stories of the people behind the industry. And it gives such a unique story and look into its history. So without further ado, Jerry, it's all you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Hannah. I'd like to start my presentation tonight with a personal story about when I first became involved with the Cranberry Historical Society in the early 1990s. I was a curator and also served as a docent on Sundays, occasionally, not every Sunday, but occasionally I did. And one of the people that I served with as a docent on the Sundays. Greeting our guest was a lady by the name of Broccolita Wister. And one day we were talking, and I guess the subject of collecting bottles came up, and she said, "You know, my ancestor was Casper Wister." And I was shocked. I thought, "Wow, that is really interesting." And we talked about that, and it was kind of I had heard the name. I knew that the Wisterberg Glassworks was a very early glassworks, but I didn't know a lot about it at the time. I've since, researched it and know a little more in detail about the history of the Wisterberg Glassworks. But her ancestor was quite a person. He was quite an early pioneer in the very earliest days of settlement in this area after the Dutch were leaving and didn't have control. The British took over New Jersey. He came from Germany in 1739. It was in the mid 1730s, and he immigrated from a small town over there in the area of Batten and Württemberg. Wittenberg, I guess would be a better pronunciation of that. And the town was so poor that they couldn't afford a school or a schoolmaster, a teacher. So most of the people were not educated, and he didn't have any particular skills. There were some political problems at the time that enticed a lot of German citizens to leave Germany, and he left and arrived in Pennsylvania at the port of Philadelphia with 9 cents in his pocket. And he was to eventually become one of the richest citizens of Pennsylvania during the colonial era. Anyway, he, according to Recolita, I didn't find this in the other documentation that I read or biographies of Casper Wister, but she said that one of the reasons he started the glass plant was his brother came over and he wanted to start a winery outside of Philadelphia, and he needed bottles, but the British were so prohibitive of tariffs and the like, it wasn't practical to try to get the bottles from Britain. And they also restricted what could be manufactured in the colonies, and glass was one of the prohibited products. So, typical of Casper, he went ahead and did it anyway, and he built a glassworks over in Galloway Township in South Jersey in the Pinelands, where there was conditions were excellent for a glass plant. There were vast resources of lumber with the pines. So there were vast resources, of course, of quality sand that could be used for manufacturing the glass. So he chose that location for its abundant resources. And he had worked out an agreement with a couple of German glass manufacturers, to supply him with the workers, because there was really no one in the colonies at that time that knew how to make glass and blow bottles. So he had around 12 glass blowers that were glass workers that were brought over from Germany in agreement with these other companies, and they kind of shared the expenses. He was very good at business, and he worked it out where he didn't have to share all the cost, and the other companies carried part of the burden. And by the time that they were at the peak production, they were producing as many as 15,000 bottles a year. It's quite a production for a small glass plant. And they ultimately had around 60 workers as well. So he took advantage of what was there, but it really wasn't the glass that made him rich. It was land speculation. One thing he realized coming from Germany is in Germany, the land was tied up by the nobility and the aristocracy, and the average guy really couldn't own property. It just wasn't available to them. But in the Americas, he saw this abundant land, and the native people were still living on the land, and it was pretty easy to buy the land cheaply. And he started getting investors buying up land and subdividing into lots and reselling it, and pretty soon became quite a successful businessman in Philadelphia. He also ran a couple of other businesses in Philadelphia too that added to his bank account. A German importing goods business, a store downtown that was also illegal. That it was illegal to bring those goods in. So he had visitors coming over from Germany to sneak things in their luggage. He actually operated the business that way. He always found a way to get around the British prohibitions on and inhibitions toward him making money in the various business enterprises. He had his own way of doing it, and he was quite successful with that. He died in 1752, I believe it was, and his son and his wife managed the company after that. Rockleader said that, and this is something else that wasn't really mentioned in the biographies, that the Wisters were Tories. They were loyalists to King George during the Revolutionary War. And at the end of the Revolutionary War, there was a lot of revenge against the Tories and the loyalists. Many of them left the country, went to Canada, went back to Europe. And so the business was shut down. It was mainly the reason for that. One biography on the internet says it was shut down because of the war, but it was kind of indirectly because of the war, because they took the wrong side during the war. But anyway, that was the earliest, the beginning of the glass industry in South Jersey. Of course, within 100 years, there were many as 40 different glass manufacturing plants in South Jersey during the Victorian period, and it became a major industry for New Jersey. But he started the glass industry in New Jersey with his humble beginnings of making wine bottles for his brother's winery. He also produced window glass, and window glass was prohibited because Britain was a major producer of window glass, and they didn't want it being produced in their colonies, but he produced it anyway. I read that there's a Quaker meeting house down in Salem Township near where the Wisterberg Glassworks was located that has some window panes that are originally from the Wisterberg works. But oops, here we go. Here's the little historical marker that marks the site of the Wisterberg Glassworks. They called it Wisterberg because the glassworkers and people associated with them built houses and they lived around there. They created a small town and they called it Wisterberg. I don't know if there's a Wisterberg today. I don't think you'd find it on the map, but it was originally called the Wisterberg and then the Wisterberg Glassworks. The bottles they produced were really pretty simple. This is called a mallet bottle. That could be a Wister piece, but it's almost impossible to tell because that same type of bottle was being made in Europe and imported into the colonies. So it's really hard to identify Wister glass. You could have a piece like that and you could toss a coin as to whether it was produced by Wister or if it was a European import. Mainly the British were importing those early bottles into the North American colonies and the Caribbean and other colonies. This is that's called an onion flask by bottle collectors. And this type of bottle, they would have probably been making those too. This is a seal bottle. If you were lucky enough to find one with a pressed seal, could be identified as Wisterberg, and you would have some way of proving that it was a true Wisterberg piece. So I'll conclude with Casper Wister. We're going to go forward in time about 100 years. And this time it was a French immigrant to the United States in the late 1830s by the name of Eugene Roussel. He was a perfumer and cosmetics retailer. He started a business downtown Philadelphia there. And he had, as it says on the window here, mineral waters. Mineral waters was a term for sodas, like we have, carbonated sodas like Coke, etc. They call them mineral waters because the technique they used in manufacturing to get the carbonation was to combine sulfuric acid and marble, ground up marble chips. And once they sulfuric acid hit the marble chips, the calcium in it created this gas, carbon dioxide gas, and it was used for carbonating drinks. They normally would be served at a fountain type of situation in drugstores and businesses, and it would be. I don't know if you've seen the old drugstores. When I was growing up, we used to go to the local drugstore on Saturday. My brother and I, when we were in town the one day to buy groceries in Tennessee, we go straight to the drugstore, and they had a wonderful soda fountain, and there was plenty of delights there for a kid. But anyway, he realized his contribution, in a sense, I wouldn't say it was greater than Wister because they're different industries, but he founded the carbonated soda water business. He was the first person in North America to bottle carbonated fruit flavored sodas, and it was an immediate hit. He couldn't keep up with it, with the sales. It was an immediate success. It was so successful that he ended up selling his perfumery business to his partner there and went into the what was called mineral water manufacturing full time on a massive scale. And he started in 1839, and by the early 1840s, he had competitors. There were other businesses. They saw that there was money to be made, and these mineral water manufacturers were popping up everywhere around Philadelphia. So that was the origin of the soda water business, which today is a multi-billion-dollar business. But he started it just by coming up with a simple idea that why not put the soda water in bottles and sell it, and people can take it home and drink it at home and pay them nice. Things just like we do today. It's really a marketing a move on his part that paid off big time. So Eugene Roussel was quite a pioneer in that respect, as of starting an industry that is a major industry today. He was a fastidious guy. He didn't like competition, and he would basically attack his competitors in the newspapers. He was, if they tried to imitate his bottles, he would print an article in the paper complaining that they were pirating and stealing his business, and could call them rascals and disreputable and things like that. He was never slow to attack his competition. He really disliked the competition. There was a lot of articles appeared in the Philadelphia papers of him attacking his competition. One guy, for instance, just made his bottles with an R on it, and he didn't like that because he thought that people would see the R, they would think it was his sodas or his mineral waters. So he wrote a long article criticizing that guy for stealing his business. And he also is credited with establishing the styles of bottles. He invented, really, I guess, created the soda style bottles that would be used for the next 100 years. There were other styles that came along after him, but for quite a few decades after him, they were still using those style of bottles. Let's see if I got something here. This is a ceramic lid to one of his makeup jars. This is a Roussel bottle. That's one of the very first soda water bottles. And later on, they became more sloped. The neck wasn't quite as sharp. It became more of a tapered, sloping neck that came down. And they began these. This is a private mold, which means that the mold was carved for him, and the lettering was carved into the mold. Later on, they've been in a system where they just made a metal plate that fit in a hole, and you can get it. Kind of had a generic bottle, and that plate would fit in that empty space in the bottle. And bottle collectors refer to those as slug plates. So slug. This is another. See, it's more sloping shoulder. That style became the standard for probably 2 or 3 decades, at least a couple of decades. It says E. Roussel Mineral Waters. This type of lip right here is indicative of the 1840s. I would date that bottle to around mid to late probably mid 1840s, pretty early. This is another one. He's got the R. He was so proud of his products. He was very fastidious about the quality of his sodas. He was concerned about the big copper pots they used for mixing up the soda. And he thought that the copper would react to the acid in the fruit syrups or the carbonation. And so he had the inside of his copper pots in his business plated with silver. And then later on, I have a bottle that says, I don't have a picture of it, but I do have the bottle that says, where he kind of brags about that his sodas are superior because they are made in silver. That's what it says on the bottle. He also encouraged other people, besides being sensitive about his competition, if he had friends and business associates that he encouraged. He set up an office in New York, and this guy by the name of Tweedle was a friend of Roussel, and he, with Roussel's encouragement, began bottling the sodas using Roussel's methods in New York, and he's one of the early New York bottlers to introduce carbonated soda in New York. His name, I think, was Thomas Tweedle. But quite a pioneer in that field, and a man that definitely established his place in history. And then we're going to go, let's see, we go from the 1840s to the 1850s. We go up about 10 years to get my. We'll go to Trenton. That's a little more local. let's see. Now, I've spent many years researching a bottling industry, and there, other people surely have done better at gleaning together all the details of the bottling history than I have. But I've worked with mainly in Trenton, the city directories that are available at the Trenton State Library. Those are a wonderful source of information on the bottlers. They printed both ads in the directories, and they had listings in the directories that provide some information. They use like genealogists, they use U.S. Census and the state census records, and they give some information. Originally, the first U.S. Census, I believe, was 1840, and then 1850 and 1860. Those censuses really didn't have much, a name and very little information. But as they went along, those censuses began to have more information, so they began to record more information about the people, where they came from, when they married, all kinds of dates, and where their parents, where they were from, their origin, and the background information on the people. So by 1900, the census were very useful, but the early censuses weren't that useful. The first mention of a bottler or brewer that I've personally found, somebody else may have something earlier than this, but the P.K. McClurg's father was Samuel McClurg, and the first Trenton City Directory, I believe, was 1844, and in that directory, Samuel McClurg was listed as a brewer, and then in the 1850 census, his son, P.K., or Peter Klein McClurg, was listed as a brewer and bottler. So he was working with his father. And from what I could tell, Samuel had kind of looking over different dates, that Samuel McClurg was originally from Philadelphia, came up to Trenton probably around 1820, and his son Peter was born in New Jersey in 1822, I believe is the date. So I know that they were active by the 1840s. So at the time that Eugene Roussel was doing very well in Philadelphia, and other people were getting into the mineral water bottling business, Peter McClurg introduced it into Trenton. And probably, and there's no absolute verification of this, but I suspect in the late 1840s. There's one bottle I found that says type of bottle. There's a McClurg bottle that was 1840s style. This is a bottle that was manufactured at the Union Glassworks in Philadelphia for Xavier Meyer. Okay, we're getting ahead of ourselves there. Okay, McClurg. So this is the main McClurg bottle. And his bottles are pretty darn rare. If you have one of those, you're a lucky person. I'll give you a little more information here with McClurg. McClurg had a kind of a tragic life. I found it was kind of sad in a lot of ways that by the time he finally died, and sometime between 1880 and 1885, he was living in a boarding house of George and Katrie Tompkins, and listed in the census as a retired widower, 59 years old, and then he died within the next 5 years. But I never found a verification of his exact date of his death. But he actually was in the bottling business until his father died in 1855. And his father was the brewer. And I suppose that you can assume that he was using his father's establishment for the mineral water bottling and probably bottling beer too. But after his father's death, I guess cut off from the resources there, by 1858 he got out of the bottling business altogether, and he married Jane Thomas. His father owned a iron and metals business, probably ornamental metals, ornamental ironworks there in Trenton. And they were married in 1846. And that was his first wife. Well, actually, it was his second wife. He was married before that. They were married in 1846, and she died in 1852. Then he married Jane Thomas and went into the iron business and dropped the bottling. So he was actually in business about 10 years during the 1850s. I don't have anything that tells me that he was in the business earlier than that. I think what I'm getting at here is it's difficult to determine exactly who the first bottlers were in their role in introducing carbonated sodas and bottled beer into Trenton. But we can have some kind of general dates and timelines here. So they operated the business as Thomas and McClure Company, and then I guess in the 1870s they eventually he retired in the late 1870s and was ended up dying between 1880 and 1885. But McClure, I personally give him credit for being one of, or the earliest bottler of mineral waters in Trenton. He was the pioneer there, thanks to his father, Samuel. Also, in the early 1850, there was a German immigrant from Baden, Germany, by the name of Xavier Meyer. And he was listed in 1850 as a bottler of porter and ale. He was, being German, he was bottling beer. And he immigrated around 1849. But he was mainly well known for being the proprietor of the Lamb Tavern. The Lamb Tavern was one of the most historic sites in Trenton. And he was a hotel keeper for the Lamb Tavern through the mid and late 1850s. And then about 1859, he disappears from records. And the only other mention I have of a person named Xavier Meyer with the same credentials was in 1860. There was a Xavier Meyer living in Bucks County of the same age and the same origin from Baden, Germany. So I would assume it was Xavier. But let's go over to his bottles. Okay, Xavier Meyer. Yeah, those are gems for a bottle collector. Those are gold. If you can find an Xavier Meyer bottle, good luck. Those are tough. I found broken pieces of
Jerry?
them. Yes.
I am so sorry to interrupt you, but we can't see your face because you're covering it with your paper. Do you mind moving it so we can see your face while you're talking?
Oh, I thought you were seeing the screen. Aren't you seeing
But we also see you, yeah.
Oh, do you? Oh, okay. I thought you were saying. I'm just checking my notes. I was trying to get the
No,
dates.
that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not really good at remembering dates, so I have notes that try to be as accurate as possible. Who knows? There may be somebody out there who will say, "Well, I have some different, information on the different dates." But anyway, Xavier was a. What's happening now? Share
I'm
your.
sorry, you need to share your screen again.
Oh, okay. I see. Okay.
Thank you.
Is that good? Do you see it?
Once you,
Okay.
there you go,
You
perfect.
you
Thank
see
you.
the Xavier Marable. Okay. This is a blue Xavier. It's probably only one of those. I'm not aware of any others that were found. That was sold at an auction a few years ago, and I think it brought about $1,500. So that tells you, makes a statement about the rarity of the bottle. Xavier Marable, that's a treasure right there for a bottle collector. But anyway, that's a porter style bottle. That particular style is a porter style. It's kind of, they're referred to by bottle collectors as squats because they're kind of squashed down. It has an applied lip up here, and it is, and it also has this. Remember, I mentioned about slug plate. You see this line around here that there's a metal plate that, with this engraved name and information on it that was put into kind of a blank generic bottle, and that kind of indicates that he wasn't spending a lot of money on bottles because he didn't want to afford to pay for a private mold to be made. There were a lot of companies that were making, you could have your molds made and to your own specifications, and it would be sent to the glass company. But they were more expensive. But these little slug plates must have been pretty darn cheap. So if you didn't want to spend a lot of money on your bottles, a slug plate would do it. This is probably as rare a bottle as you can, even though it's not a great picture. I visited a friend who lives in Trenton. That's on taking a Mill Hill where he lived. He doesn't live there anymore, but he he would dig in outhouses around that area, and he found a lot of very rare bottles. But this is a Killian and Brother, Eillian. He was an interesting story. He was 1850s, about the same time as Xavier Meyer, classified as an early Trenton bottler. But I found two articles in the Trenton True American newspaper. One that said that he and another man by the name of Quigley had been convicted of forgery. They were forging banknotes on the Bank of New Jersey and got caught. And he was convicted and sent off to jail. So his entire bottling career lasted about a year, I think. So those bottles are, as they say, rare as hen's teeth. Killian and Brother. I think the brother was John, and John didn't go to jail, but he didn't continue in the bottling business. That's it. And the Hetzel was a German immigrant who had a brewery, and he also did some bottling in the 1860s, a little later, but it's interesting. And also a very rare bottle, Hetzel, Jacob Hetzel. He sold out to another guy by the name of Schroeder, and wasn't in business all that long. He was over in, actually his brewery was near a broad street around Chambersburg area. I don't think they called it Chambersburg, Session area of Trenton. It's another, an aqua version of the Jacob Hetzel bottle. These things may as well be made out of solid gold as far as the bottle collectors are concerned. This is a picture of Trenton from a turn of the century. I'm going to get into some of the glass making and to go back here. it's kind of like, I guess, rewind and go back to the mechanics of the industry. Oops. So I'll show you some images here. That art glass being produced at a old style glass house, and let's get some different pictures here. We go. So glass, the glass blowers were referred to as gaffers. The gaffers worked in, basically it took three men. This guy in the back is marbering. It's a big metal or a stone plate, and he would gather the right amount of glass on the blowpipe, which he's using here, and he would roll it. There's other pictures of that as well. I probably could find a better picture. Let's see what else we got. We got a picture of it. No, this is not good. I'm going to go back here. Oh, be patient here. Let me find this again. I'm sorry. Oh, nope, not right. Nope, not the right one. Oh, here we go. There we go. That's the one. Sorry about that. Okay, here we go. We have the guy. This guy is a marbering. He would roll it on. Well, no, this guy back here would probably have been the marbering. He would be rolling it into kind of a shape. It was just a kind of a very crude bottle shape, and blow a little bit of air in it, and would hand it to this guy who's the bottle blower. And down here we have a young guy who's the mold boy. And those molds were made in two pieces that were hinged. He blew the glass, he opened the mold, the guy stuck the molten glass in there, and he closed the mold, and then the gaffer blew into the pipe, and then he opened the mold and took it out, and they would clip it off the end of the blowpipe. One of the reasons there's a lot of photographs available, particularly on the internet, of glassworks, and the New Jersey glassworks are well documented, is that child labor became a big issue in about 1900, and by 1905, New Jersey passed child labor laws prohibiting, restricting children from being used in factories and manufacturing, which was common during the Victorian era. It was a way that young people learned their father's trades, or in kind of an apprentice system, I would call it. And they worked together in the glass plants, and they would grow up and they would end up working in the glass plant. Here's a guy right here is finishing off some bottles, reheating them. So there's a lot of photographs taken by, here's some kids at the Lair Glassworks. This little guy here must be maybe 8 or 10 years old. They're working with the annealing ovens, is what it looks like. Once the bottle was blown and they got finished with it by the furnace, they put them in a low heat oven, and the low heat oven would prevent the bottle from cooling too quickly and cracking, and it would help temper the glass properly. So it had to anneal in that low heat furnace for at least 12 hours or more, I think. Here's, again, boys working with the adults in the glass plant. Very, very dirty, very, you can be sure there's lots of fumes and dust and smoke in the air and things like that. They did have vent pipes. This is the main furnace over here. The holes into the furnace were called the glory hole. And there was a pot where it was siphoned off into these pots by these holes where the glass workers worked, and they would get that molten glass from that pot, a secondary pot. These photos are really terrific in that they document something that, if it wasn't for, I guess, the news reporters, newspaper reporters, and other people interested in covering the child labor issue around the turn of the century, early 1900s. This would never have been documented. They didn't do a lot of photographs of people working in those kind of environments. Photographers would rarely ever wander into a glass house and start taking photos. Here we have looks like a good old blob beer bottle. This is a mold. It had handles on it. It was opened with those handles, and once he's got the clamps they used to pull the bottle out of the mold. I never understood why they were weighing. This looked like a scale and they were weighing the bottles. I've never understood what the purpose of that was. They had these metal cups on the end of a metal rod that they used to hold the bottle when they were reheating the lips to form a lip on the bottle, which when it came out and it would just break off the rare glass, raw glass. It would just be jagged, sharp glass there. So they had to reheat that and form a lip on that. That was a separate process. More glass blowing. This is good. You get a good picture of the mold here. I got all the different crew. These are basically crew. I think they worked in in a sense, contract workers, in the sense that they worked pretty independently. They were pretty secretive, I think, about their techniques they used. There wasn't a lot of information left to document the techniques that the glass blowers in those places used. It was pretty secret. They didn't like the competitions. They were pretty secretive. So we don't really know. There's a lot of unanswered questions about how the bottles were blown, certain aspects. Here they're reheating a bottle probably to put the lip on. The lip would be formed with a lipping tool. It's a special iron tool that was used for forming the lip, the blob top, or even the crown top. That's a powerful photograph. That guy means business there. I'm going to go a little bit there. Let's see. What happened with the glass blowers was automation it was bad enough that they lost the kids. In 1905, I believe it was, that New Jersey passed laws prohibiting children or restricting children from working in industrial environments. The bottle, the glass workers were unionized, and they had a good union. And the union complained to the governor that they couldn't survive without the additional labor of the kids. And but it was a losing battle. They lost that one. And about the same time, this monstrosity here came along. This is an automatic bottle making machine. It's one of the early ones. They came in around the turn of the century. The E.L. Kearns was the first to automate his uh, bottling operation in Trenton. And this, of course, is a glassmaking, was so different. But once they were able to mass manufacture bottles through automation, they didn't need the glass blowers anymore. So the glass blowers are out of business. These did the same job as the glass blowers. They were big, mechanical versions of the gaffers. There's a mold here, different, and it injected the molten glass into the mold and then removed the bottle and just repeated it over and over and over again. And as you can see, it's circular, so it probably had about a dozen of these going at the same time. It would produce thousands of bottles in a day. It was much more productive than hand blowing. So that destroyed the hand blown glass. That's another machine there. It gives you a little perspective on the size of the machine. You see this person here in comparison to that automatic bottling machine in the background there. It's probably weighed a couple of tons. There's another one. But it was, that's what was happening at the turn of the century. We were becoming an industrial nation, and we were automating everything, and it was inevitable that the hand trades, making anything by hand, was doomed. It was going to be automated, and so that happened with bottle making. This is more of a modern operation here, producing whiskey bottles on a modern machine. Here's a real miracle of whoops. See if we can get this going. This is a film that was done in 1909, a bottle operation demonstrating a hand blowing bottles. Hopefully it'll come up here. It may be a little slow. I haven't tested this over the internet, so I'm not sure how. It may be a little choppy, but it's a pretty amazing piece. This was documented by. There we go. There's the marbering guy. You see how he marbers it, and into the mold. Mold boy opens her up, takes his clamps, takes the bottle out, throws it in some sawdust there. So the marbering guy. So three men would make a bottle in how many seconds there? It took, I'd say about 5 seconds or something like that. One of the things that evolved by the, well, even pretty early, I think, by the 1850s, the companies began to supply the industry. So you could buy anything, because in this case, that's the bottle packing crates. Then these are catalogs of the bottles you could order, and it gives all the specifications. You go through the bottle catalog of the Illinois Glass Company, and then you could choose the bottle that you liked and order it, and it would probably be pretty cheap. The gaffers, my understanding, they made about, I think, 7 cents on a bottle, and the bottling company made had to pay about 9 cents per bottle. That doesn't sound like a lot of money by today's standards. That's from 1906. A different. Here's a picture of a mold. They make special molds for you. They had everything you needed. All kinds of machines, every type of bottle that you need. These are Hutchison bottles, the seltzer bottles. Anything you needed, they had it for sale. Let's see. I want to, I think for the sake of the Hopewell Historical Society, do something with this guy, John Roussel. John Roussel actually at one point operated a bottling business in Hopewell. The bottle is very, very rare. This is a John Roussel bottler. It says Hopewell, New Jersey. It's a tough one to find. I never was lucky enough to come by one of those. That's what it looks like. It's a blob top, probably 1880s or so, late 1880s, early 1890s. These are some other Roussel bottles. But he and his father came from Trenton, where they had owned a couple of different businesses. They were Italian immigrants, and they ran a confectionery store, and later I think they sold fruits and vegetables in the market at Market Street in Trenton. This quart size is a rare one. These are pretty common. And then after he left Hopewell, I think he must have only been there a year or two, maybe at the most. There's very little known about him being there. And how he ended up in Hopewell is a mystery too. Why Hopewell? If I were him, I would have probably moved to Trenton or a city, maybe. But of course, he had a lot less competition in a small town like Hopewell versus a place like Trenton that would have had a dozen bottlers he had to compete with, and many of them well established. There's a Emilio Grande, Joseph Cattell. These are two. Well, Rosso ended up in Kingston. Kingston was a kind of a magnet for Italian immigrants because of the stone quarry there, the trap rock quarries. And they were building around the turn of the century masonry for Princeton University when they were building those big stone buildings you see with all the carving and fancy masonry. Well, the Italian stonecutters were brought over from Italy, and they lived in Kingston. It's a little town right next to Princeton. I mean, they adjoin each other, and it's on Route 27 there. There were a number of bottlers in Kingston. A competitor for John Rosso, when he got there, was Emilio Grande. And he was an older guy. He had been around for a while. He had a bottling business. But he also just did everything. I noticed in the census, some of the census would say his profession was day laborer. So he was kind of in the bottling business, doing whatever he could to make a dime. And then his this young guy comes to town, Joseph Catelli. He did really well. He came in the early 1900s, and he marries Emilio Grandi's daughter, and he ends up, being Grandi's son-in-law. And I guess he must have kind of taken over Grandi's business. But these were competitors to Roussel at the time. So Roussel was competing with Catelli. And Catelli actually was doing a lot better. His bottles are pretty common around here. If you dig in any old bottle dump in this area, you always find either complete or broken Joseph Catelli bottles. So he was pretty successful. But the story that kind of makes, I guess, John Roussel a little more interesting is he was murdered in 1903. And it seems that the Rousseaus were not of the best character people. They who knows, maybe they were run out of Hopewell, and eventually they were run out of Kingston. John Roussel was murdered by his live-in girlfriend. They believe, maybe I shouldn't say that because she was never actually charged with it, but the police thought that she was behind it. But he was shot at like 2:30 in the morning in his bed, and he refused to tell who shot him. And his girlfriend, I believe it was a black lady, she said, "Well, she recognized the guy, and he was a black man that she knew from over in Creekstown." But police went over and interviewed him, and he had a pretty good alibi, so she was just covering up there. That was not credible. So it's a story bounced in and out of the newspapers, even like the New York Times that print these kind of stories. You find it in the New York Times in 1903, 1904, because it was sort of an ongoing thing. The police were investigating it. The mystery was that, was it really his girlfriend? And anyway, after he was murdered, his father wanted to continue the bottling under his name in Kingston, but the city or the township wouldn't let him. They wanted to get rid of him, so he was basically forced out of Kingston, and that was the end of the Rousseaus in Kingston. The father, John Roussel Sr., he ended up from census records in about 1910 living in a home for old people over in Princeton, I believe. And that was the story of John Roussel, the sordid story of John Roussel. But that's not the worst story. Probably the most tragic story would be the story of Leo Salamandra. And that's too long and complicated to follow here. I could be talking all night long about Leo Salamandra, who was a liquor and a soda distributor out of Trenton. And he was murdered in Kingston, too. And the story of his murder involved the mafia, and involved intrigue, involved just... I posted the story on the New Jersey Bottle website, and I had a reply from a relative of Leo Salamandra, and he said that the family story was that Leo... Here's a bottle from Leo Salamandra. That Leo's brother Vito actually engineered his murder because he was having an affair with his wife. So it was very sordid. I mean, it was really a lot of intrigue going on there. And he ended up marrying Salamander's wife shortly, within a few months after his death. It's another salamander. Salamander bottles are pretty rare. You don't see them very much. The blob top is an early one. I'm even surprised because he was kind of later. He really didn't get going in Trenton until early 1900s. A lot of these other bottlers at that time had been around for decades. So he was a newcomer in Trenton, and his business was big. At the onset of Prohibition, New Jersey allowed distributors like Salamander to dispose of their stock in a 2-year grace period. And that was actually kind of what was going on behind the murder, and it's what I guess it brought about the murder and him being in Kingston. That was a reason to be there because they were hauling liquor they were going to sell to these bootlegger operation in Newark. They were trying to liquidate. He had 2 warehouses of liquor he had to get rid of, and or else they'd have to eat it, so or drink it with it. But it's kind of a tragic story. He seemed like he was probably a pretty nice, hardworking guy. From all that I found out about him, he didn't deserve the fate that he did. I'm going to go through. We're up to, say, in the 1880s and 90s, after the early, what I would call the pioneers like Xavier Meyer and McClurg and those people. By the 1880 through the early 1900s, you had a proliferation of these bottling companies. I'll just go through a few of them. Capital City Bottling, which is interesting because the bottles have an engraving up here of the dome on the state capitol. That's pretty. I always thought that was neat. And they were in business from about probably 1905 to 1915 or so. A lot of their bottles are machine made, which indicates they were later. Charles Gender, very obscure. I never really found out much on Gender. Edward Smith, that's another obscure bottler in Trenton, probably around the turn of the century. Hay Barrel and Patterack, they were around the 1890s. They use the Putnam closure there, which I'll talk about a little too. This is a James Howard bottled. Howard and Grimes and Howard, they were in and out of business throughout the mid to late 1890s. You see bottles that say James Howard, and then the bottles with Grimes' name, and then Grimes and Howard. There's a whole variety of their bottles. C.O. Johnson, he was I could have included him in the earlier bottles. But he didn't really get going until about 1880, late 1870s. This bottle here would be from the 1880s. This bottle is Johnson and Reeder. V.P. Reeder was his brother-in-law, and they were in business on and off. And then Reeder was kind of a freelancer. He worked with John Schroth, who had a substantial bottling business, and his brother-in-law, and then on his own. It was a great photograph of it. This was it's probably 1870s, but one of the small kind of obscure companies. The only reference I found to Keyhole and Purcell was in 1871. I think that's about it. The bottles are pretty rare. Wasn't in business that long. Keyhole and Purcell. Liston Mink, 1890s. This bottle has a C, which is wrong. It's a misspelling. His name was Gottlieb Mink. This is type of bottle that's usually identified with Weiss beer. Weiss in German means white beer, or some people call it wheat beer. It's beer made from wheat. And anyway, they were in business probably 5 or 6 years. Another one of the many companies operating in the 1890s in Trenton. George Ripman, he's interesting. He was involved in one of the bottling operations. And 444 Broad Street, which is South Broad Street, actually. That location was used by 3 different bottlers, and he was the last bottler to use it. Before him was Sebastian Walter. Then Robert Elliott was the first to use it in the 1880s. I might talk about Robert Elliott. He's a pretty well-known, successful bottler that worked for the Morton and Richardson. That's a salamander. I think, I realize now I've kind of gotten I'm going to go back to oops. Yeah, I didn't cover Morton Richardson. They're really the people that I'll talk about the early bottlers. And we'll just rewind here and go back to Morton and Richardson. You see their bottles up for auction. They're not particularly rare, but they're early and they're nice to have for any collection. William Morton was a Irish immigrant. Nathan Richardson was from Rhode Island and came down to the Trenton at about the same time as Morton. It's the late 1840s. By the early 1850s, they were working together as Morton and Richardson. I think probably in the early 1850s, maybe between 1850, 1853 or something, 1852, they may have been running separate companies. That's a little vague on that. The bottles show up as William Morton or Richardson. This is an 1853 stoneware mead bottle. Is clearly dated 1853, so we know from that they were in business in 1853. And that's an 1854 Morton and Richardson. And this is a Morton bottle by himself. And this is a Aqua Morton. And this is another Morton. And this is a Richardson. This is probably an early 1850s bottle. So they started out independently and then very quickly merged into one company. And did very well. They were in business a long time. During the Civil War, Trenton was like the hub for all the activities of the troops going and coming from the South. They have filtered through Trenton. And Richardson, I'm sure, noticed that there was a huge demand for hotels and lodging. So he dropped during the Civil War, he basically dropped the bottling business and went into, he bought the American Hotel, I believe it is. I have to check my notes. No, the Lafayette Hotel. The Lafayette Hotel he bought. And he managed it with a guy by the name of Stupin. They were in business together. And he had a son, Charles C.L., who worked with him. I think he ran the livery stable at that time, that he was managing the hotel. He probably did pretty well on that. So there's huge amounts of people going and coming through Trenton at that time. It was a smart move on his part. It would have been a lot more profitable than the bottling business, which in my opinion was never that profitable for most of these people. Some people made money on it, but it wasn't hard to do. This is C.H. Richardson bottles. When Nathan Richardson died in 1876, his son Charles kind of started on his own, and these bottles are embossed C.H. Richardson. He wasn't obviously much of a businessman. Something happened there. I'm not sure. But he disappeared very quickly. He started, for some reason, he didn't use his father's business, so he didn't use his name or location. He moved to another location. He called his business a Star Bottling House. It was down on Chancery Street. And within about a year, that was 1877, but next year there was no sign of him in any of the records. He dropped out of the census records and city directory. So I don't know what happened. Either he died or he moved away. I never knew what happened to Charles Richardson, but that ended the bottling adventures of the Richardson family. They were in the old estate bank. That's the building right there. And like a lot of these bottlers, they had other things going. They ran a laundry out of that business too. So they were running a laundry and their bottling business. So they were making money left and right. It was a bank in Warren Street. All that stuff is torn down. When they built that Washington, the Battle of Trenton Monument there, they tore down the Lamb Tavern, most historic site in Trenton. Been there since the 1730s, 40s. And this building would have gone. Surrounding the five corners, there's where all these bottlers were kind of congregated in that area. And they were there. They were very successful, though. When Morton died in 1874, I think it was, he had considerable assets. So did Richardson. They did pretty well. Yeah, they were smart businessmen, and they stayed in the business for probably about from 1850 to 1870s. So over 20 years. To survive in that business, 20 years is a feat. It's an accomplishment for sure. But they have their place in early Trenton history, as far as I'm concerned. Go the other last of the bottlers I'm going to talk about will be E.L. Kearns. Kearns was quite he's a big, burly guy and quite an imposing figure. And he ended up in Trenton and probably the early 1880s. Because his father was a blacksmith in Pennsylvania where they were living. And his father died, and his mother moved the family to Trenton, where she thought there would be better opportunity for them to make a living. He had a brother, and him and his brother. So Trenton, he did some work with his brother as a chair maker, I think it was. That was in the census records. But his big break was John Schroth, and I'll have to talk about John Schroth too. John Schroth was a heavy hitter in Trenton bottling. But Kearns' big break was when he married, his wife's father owned a slaughterhouse on Rose Avenue. So 122 Rose Avenue. Rose Avenue is on Brunswick Pike, just slightly a few blocks north of the Five Corners there, the Washington Monument. And he died not too long after they were married. And Kearns had gotten a job working with John Schroth, and he was he absorbed the bottling business. He learned it real quick, and he saw the opportunity. He had a building. He wanted to start it. He wasn't content working with someone else. So he went in business with his brother-in-law, Ed Meyer, his brother-in-law there at 122 Rose Street. And I read that they would stay up during the night bottling, him, his wife, and his brother-in-law, and then they would deliver the sodas, mainly sodas when he started out. He was such a go-getter that he had to formulate his own formulas for the sodas, the fruit soda syrups. He made his own. He was very particular about the quality. And this advertisement here is Kearns and Meyer. That's the first company. It was 1889. And he just left John Schroth and started his own business when that Ed was. I guess they were doing, later on, they were doing some beer too. But they started out with soda. But to show you how ambitious he was, he went from the old slaughterhouse building to this 4-story building at North Broad Street within just a very few years. His brother-in-law didn't want to continue in the bottling business, and so he left and went to work for Franz Hill Brewery in Trenton. And Kearns went out on his own as E.L. Kearns bottler. I think I have a photo here. E.L. Kearns bottler. That photo probably dates about early 1890s or so. And the building is in the back there. And this is Kearns in front. You see what an imposing person he was. He's staring right at the camera, very, very intent, very determined guy. And his company lasted almost 90 years. That was his accomplishment. I mean, he became the foremost bottler in Trenton, in the history of Trenton. There was nobody came close to his success. And not only in the volume of business, but the innovations and the quality that he introduced. But how long that he survived in the business. His company was eventually bought by another company in about 1980. So I'm sure there's people listening who remember drinking Kearns sodas. When I first moved to New Jersey in the early 1970s, we used to buy a Kearns soda at the market on Main Street that had been selling Kearns soda since 1910. Harold O'Neill, he produced a quality sodas. I remember people saying, "Well, you got to try Kearns root beer. It's great," and it was. I tried it. It was a very good quality root beer. I liked his root beer a lot. But his level of success was never matched by anyone else. So he deserves a credit for the hard work and intelligence and perseverance. And that's him. I think he was, from some of the things I've seen, he was a kind of a populist. Or at the turn of the century, populism was a big issue. It was, back to the farm. The agrarian lifestyle was considered the model lifestyle for Americans. It was pure and simple, and people worked hard, and it wasn't corrupted by the city, big city, and things like that. I think he was that type. He was a sportsman. He was pretty nifty. And his logo, the elk, was a play on his name, ELK, for E.L. Kearns, and he used that elk. That's a pretty smart logo. It made his products very identifiable. That helped his success too, I think. He was very smart in marketing his products. This is from a tray. This is a change tray with the elk on it. It says bottler of Sunday drinks for workaday workers. He was obviously supporters of the unions and the working man's movement, which was a big part of the populist movement at the turn of the century. And he also was a community supporter of various sporting activities. This is a baseball club that he sponsored, and these I had to look up that shirt he's wearing with the elk. That's amazing. I wonder if anybody has one of those. And this banner, amazing artifacts. But anyway, he was quite a sportsman. I think he was a hunter too, like to get out and hunt and things like this. His bottles are nice. I mean, for a collection, Trenton collection, you got to have some Kearns bottles. You get the ELK elk logo and the script writing. It's very distinctive and it's beautifully made. Very good quality bottles. This is a porcelain top to a Kearns bottle. Those porcelain tops are rare. He didn't use the porcelain stoppers that much. So that's kind of a rarity. This is from the bottle, the elk staring out at you. And he, besides his diversity of sodas, which were very popular, he obviously did very well in the sodas. He also sold, distributed liquors, some liquors, and more liquors from Kearns. This is a liquor jug. Kearns. Some later bottles, Kearns soda, and these date from the 1960s and 70s from my collection. And this is a seltzer bottle, probably from the 1930s, possibly 40s. And there's a couple other interesting, there's a shot glass. He was the first to, this is what you would remember. This is what would have been sold in the 70s and 80s. You would have found these in markets around here. This is the last of the Kearns bottles. There he is again. Quite a powerhouse, a business genius in a sense. One of those successful self-made man. He lived the populist dream. I think the populist dream was to, he had the self-made man who worked really hard and came from adversity and poverty and worked his way up to success. So he lived the American dream, that's for sure. He died in 1925. He was living over in just across the river on River Road. Along the Delaware. So that's, let's see, go with Schroth. I'll do Schroth, and I'm going to I think I'll end with Schroth. Schroth was kind of like Kearns, but he was never successful on the level of Kearns. He never had the big building, and he didn't have the fancy advertising items, and he had a more limited products. But he was involved in with a lot of different people in Trenton. He was very well known, and John Schroth ended up in Trenton. This is the 1850 U.S. Census in Danville, Pennsylvania. There's Andrew Schroth. Andrew Schroth is John Schroth's father. He was 32 years old in 1850. He was a farmer. His assets of $2,000. Not bad for that time. And here's John. He was 5 years old in 1850. And he had a brother, Andrew. This is actually Andrew who's got bad writing, but he had a slightly older brother named Andrew, though they never called him Andrew Jr. But anyway, they moved down to Schuylkill Haven, Pennsylvania. I read an article in the Trenton paper in 1863. It said citizens of Trenton are thinking of fleeing the city in advance of the rebel invasion of Pennsylvania. When Lee moved the rebel army into Pennsylvania, and before they were met by the Union forces at Gettysburg, people were fleeing. I mean, you had this massive rebel army of 30,000 men. They were living off the land. They would come and take your horses and your food and whatever they needed. They were terrified. So even in Trenton, people were afraid that there was a chance that, maybe if they can invade southeastern Pennsylvania, they can also invade New Jersey. So people were leaving Trenton for probably go down to the shore or something like that and hide out until the war ended. But anyway, I think Andrew moved his family from Schuylkill Haven to Trenton at that time. I know it's at least 1862 or 63. It's been, I've had kind of a disagreement with somebody about that date. But I suspect that was the reason he moved from Schuylkill Haven. But he had been a farmer, but in Schuylkill Haven he was running a restaurant and a bottling business, a mineral water bottling business. And when he came to Trenton, he settled on South Warren Street, and he started another restaurant, and he started up his bottling business. The bottling operation was in the basement. The restaurant was on the first floor, and everybody lived upstairs. That's the way it was done back then. But Andrew Shaw didn't live too long. He died in 1867. It was only from 1863, so about 4 to 5 years, and he died. And John took over the business, and that's what got him into the business. And he continued. I don't think the restaurant continued, but Schroth was definitely intent on building up the business his father had kind of toyed with over the years. Let me go over here, I'll show you. So, this is a Schuylkill Haven, Pennsylvania. This is a super rare bottle. This is a Andrew Schroth blue soda, and it's embossed with Schuylkill Haven. That's before he moved to Memphis. To Trenton. That bottle was actually made at the Union Glassworks down in Philadelphia. Very rare bottle, very rare. You could trade your car for that bottle. I mean, it. But anyway, after his father's death, he continued business. He did well. He began building a sizable business, and he moved over to Bridge Street and then up on Hanover. And I think he stayed on Hanover for quite a long time. But he would partner up with other bottlers. Here's the Andrew Schroth Trenton. The blue bottle was Andrew Schroth, Schuylkill Haven, Pennsylvania, and here we have Andrew Schroth in Trenton. This bottle would date probably 1865 or thereabouts. These were mineral water. This was a porter beer style. At least the style is porter beer. That's what they call it. Bottle collectors call a squat. And here's a pretty early John Schroth, but that's when he was at Bridge Street, I think. And here's Schroth's bottling established on 10. Mineral waters, ginger ale, porter ale, brown stout, cider, Peps, Phillips Best. He was covering all bases there. He got into selling major brands like Pabst, Phillips Best Milwaukee Lager beer. Been around for a long time. And these are, he had some interesting bottles. These are nice, you know. He wasn't as fastidious about his bottles as a guy like Kearns. He would accept more generic style of bottles. But Kearns liked to design his bottle. You know, he put a lot of thought into what his product looked like. Schroth didn't. This is a kind of more of a generic bottle. Those very nice, you know. The light ambers are very desirable among collectors. And then he also was in partnership with Benjamin Reeder. Benjamin Reeder had married into the Johnson family, the C.O. Johnson, the bottler. And he had worked with him for a while. And then in the 1880s, he partnered up with Schroth as a Trenton bottling company. And they put a little more effort into the design. They use that eagle design. It's pretty attractive. You know, it's kind of nice, but it's not a very good quality bottle. I mean, it's kind of a thick, clumsily made bottle. And this is a little more. This is called a champagne beer style. It's a larger style. One thing I noticed about the bottlers, it's in the 1850s and 60s and 70s, the bottles were smaller. But at a certain point, the wind changed. You know, they needed, as there began to be very heavy competition, more and more bottlers, and they had to give more beer. You know, if somebody bought their product, they would give them more beer. So they came out with this. This became throughout the 1880s and 90s a pretty standard beer bottle, but it was larger and held more beer than the previous generation of bottles. They were competing on. Sometimes they would. I think it was George Schumacher in Trenton. I was in a kind of a war with another bottler to see who could give the best deal, and he's had special crates made where his competitor was giving an extra bottle of beer for every crate of 2 dozen you bought, you know, but he would give you an extra 4 bottles or something. He had the crates modified so he could give you more. So giving you more, and then you see the quart-sized bottles appeared about this time. So giving you more became a selling point for bottlers. Here's the BP Reader. BP Reader is interesting in that he is the only bottler at Trenton that I found a research that was actually from Trenton. I mean, he was born in Ewing Township, which I consider Trenton area. And all the others came from somewhere else or were immigrants from different countries, like Germany and Ireland. And this is a wonderful photograph. I have to credit the Princeton Historical Society of this. This is a well identified. This is 1887, Witherspoon Street. That's Sullivan's Grocery, and this is BP Reader delivering his beer. That's amazing that was caught on photo. How that happened. That is so rare. These people were rarely photographed working, so that's amazing. But he didn't look too healthy. You know, he looks like he's overweight and old, maybe prematurely old looking there, because he died after he and John Schroth joined as partners in 1893. BP Reader died. I don't know what he died of, but he died suddenly in 1893. It was the end of that partnership between him and Schroth. I think Schroth continued with the Trenton Bottling Company because it's a lot different. I see this Schroth Reader. and the Eagles and John Shaw. That's a rarity. There's some little thing like that you would take for granted. It's a porcelain stopper for a bowl. Those are rare. Schroth didn't use those very much. I've never seen one. Another Schroth reader bowl. Trenton Bottling Company without that. It was probably after Reader's death. Yeah. And this is a Johnson in Reader. It's when Reader was with his brother-in-law, Charles Johnson, C.O. Johnson. Let's see if I got anyone else. Yeah, a little bit here. I'll just go through this real quick. One of the things that occurred by the turn of the century, and particularly the earlier 1900s, you began to have the immigration from Eastern Europe and from Russia. You had Jewish immigrants coming from the Ukraine and Western Russia, and they were filtering in through New York, and some settled in Trenton, like Jacob Fishman. He did pretty well for himself, but sometimes following the census records, they would be listed as junk dealers a lot of times, so that kind of thing. I got into different types of business. This is a different Fishman. He was on Hancock Street, 108 Hancock Street, Jacob Fishman. It's 3 different bottles from Jacob Fishman. Another Fishman bottle. Lehman, the company that was Onikowski. Yeah, he was a Polish, Jewish immigrant who came in the early 1900s, turn of the century period. He was sort of in, I think the Goldman brothers owned a store downtown. And so he had some arrangement with them. I guess he was selling out of their store, maybe he was bottling out of their store. Rossetto Salamandra. I think he was the uncle of Leo Salamandra, the guy who got killed, murdered. I was never quite sure on the relationship, but 2 salamanders. There's actually 3 salamanders in Trenton. At the same time, had to be related, in my opinion. And this is Leo Salamander bottles. This is Salamander's daughters. There's an article about them in the newspaper. They had a recital or something. Kind of sad to think of what happened with their father. That's later on. And this is his grave in the Greenwood Cemetery. Leo Salamander. His murder in Kingston was in 1922, I think it was. Right at the beginning, really, when they clamped out on the prohibition. And then it's a lot of it's a big scramble to kind of capture the illicit liquor business. And he became a fatality, maybe. Jacob Fishman again. But anyway, the immigrant aspect of these businesses is very important. These people came to the United States. They were very ambitious. They came under very difficult circumstances, and they were willing to sacrifice and work really, really hard. So my hat's off to those immigrants who came and settled in foreign places like Trenton, New Jersey, and made a life for themselves and probably have descendants around here today. And I'm sure hopefully are doing well. This is the Trenton Brewing Company. And about 1899 or 1900, 3 of the major bottling companies in Trenton merged. They formed a People's Brewing Company and the Trenton Brewing Company, which I think is the same company, Trenton Brewing Company. But I think it was first called the People's Brewing Company, and then the name was changed to Trenton a year later. It wasn't the People's very long. But that's the building with today. I don't know if that still exists today. I mean, this photo looks like probably isn't that old. It may still be around, but that's that same building you see here. And it says Trenton Brewing Company, capacity 200,000 barrels a year. Is a lot. And being on the river, it's down on Layler Street, right by the river. And it was also connected to the same people owned the Hygiene Ice Company. I guess they were cutting ice off of the Delaware River and reselling it during the summer. But those were two substantial businesses that were there. We were really into the early 1900s. These companies, this is a bottle for the Trenton Brewing Company that would date from the 1930s. That's right after Prohibition. They still use the same logo there. Those are pretty common on later dumps around here. I've thrown many of those away. I probably should have saved them. But their early bottles are attractive. They were kind of well known because of the lion. They embossed this lion on the front of the bottle. It's a logo, and it says Trenton Brewing Company in it. And here's some other Trenton Brewing Companies that also use this logo here. Trenton Brewing Company at Crown Top. And this is maybe a little better picture of the lion. You see the lion. Those are pretty popular. The amber bottle is a little tougher to get than the others. Oh, there they are. But that extended. Different iterations of that company, I think, survived up into maybe the 60s or so. Or maybe even later. I don't know. There were some different brands, you know. I think Trenton Old Stock Beer, I don't know if they still make that, but that was around. I think, I'm not a beer drinker, so I don't know the beers. Not a drinker at all, but I think some of their products were still around in the 60s, 70s, maybe. Were pretty successful. I know they Trenton Old Stock. How much time do we have here?
Hi, Jerry. We should probably wrap up. It's about 9 o'clock, but we have a couple.
Okay, I'm sorry.
But we have a couple of questions that have
Okay,
come in
good.
for you.
All right. Well, let me stop sharing then. Okay. I'll see who's
Okay,
here.
there's just a few questions, and if people do have any other questions, please feel free to put them into the chat.
Okay.
So one of the things that was asked when you were showing the pictures of the with the bottles with the folded lips, how did they seal those? Did they use cork or baling wire, or was there something else that they used?
Okay, let me just share again. I skipped part that would have explained that, and I wanted to include closures, the different types of closures, and explain that. So I have some pictures. I'll just show it. If you, I'm gonna go back to share. Okay. Let me. Okay, here we go. Now there was I guess I don't call it a race, but there was definitely a tremendous competition by different companies eager to supply bottling equipment was to have a patent closure, and they could make a lot of money off of that, possibly if it became popular. So there was a lot of different closures that were used, And here's Pennsylvania Bottle and Supply Company. They were one that was, they had a patent closure, and it's a bottle from them. But what was the question exactly? Was what type of closure did they use on the blob bottles?
Yes, on the bottles that had the folded lips, when you were talking about
Oh
that,
yeah,
what kind of
oh yeah.
closures
Here
did
we
they
go.
use?
This will explain it. Yeah, these are the early and some of the rare patent closures. But the common one, the early one, was here. It had just a cork and a wire that went around. These I call a double colored lip. This is a regular. This is a style of just a wire bail that held the stopper in. It was fastened around the neck and it folded back and forth. Uh, and then the lightning, the ones that are most popular that you see a lot, that were the most commonly used, was the Putnam stopper used from 1859 through 1910, or who knows, even later. The lightning style, universally used, the Carl Hutter patent from 1893, that was universally used. These are rare closures that were patent that didn't really take off. But these four in the beginning are the styles that were used most commonly. I think that hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you very much. And then
What?
I have an attendee who is asking if you can give a brief explanation of what features to look for to determine the date of a bottle.
Okay, hold a second. Well, that can be deceptive because the squat bottles tend to be 1850s, 60s, and you can usually count on that. But that style sort of had a revival about the turn of the century, and then you see some later squat style bottles. So there was a period in the 1880s and 90s where they didn't use that style of bottle. This what it was called a squat. Let me see if I can. I'll bring up a squat bottle. I probably have one in here somewhere. That's a Hutchison bottle. That would sort of technically be a, but it's not a classic squat. This is a squat bottle. That style was used regularly for beer in the 1850s and 60s. If you have a bottle like that, it generally is going to be from that period, particularly if it's colored green or blue. It's definitely going to be pre-1880. But that particular bottle, the Adam Scheit Brewing Company down in Norristown, PA, they used that style in the turn of the century. That bottle there dates from around the turn of the century. It was kind of a revival of this older style. So that kind of muddies the water on dating based on the shape of the bottle. Of course, let me go. This style here, you can be sure those tall champagne beers are they're going to be anywhere from 1880s through to 1915 or so. Later on, the crown bottles became a standard. The crown bottle, the crown closure was, I don't have it. These are early ones. I don't have a crown in here. The crown is the same kind of top we have today where you have a little metal thing and you pop it off. That's called a crown top or crown closure. And that was invented by the Crown Cork and Seal Company, which I believe was in Philadelphia. And it was introduced pretty early, but didn't really become as popular with the bottlers until they came out with the automatic bottling machine, because these types of bottles would not I don't think they could have been used with an automatic bottling machine. I don't think they were. They were pretty much designed with the crown top. And the crown top, from I guess the introduction of the automatic bottling machine, say 1903 period, until now, has become a standard. You know. It slowly made all of these things become extinct. Many different types. The Hutchison is the spring. There's something I want to do here too. I want to go stop sharing. Talk about closures. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Can you see me? Okay.
Yes, we can see you.
Okay. I want to demonstrate a closure. Hopefully, this is a cod bottle. The cod bottle was invented by a guy in England by the name of Cod in 1878 or 79. And it's a very unique closure that was used very extensively in the British Isles and its colonies, but never really gained much popularity in the United States. There were some companies in Philadelphia with, I'm going to try to, there we go. Mm-hmm. There we go. So you have to get this little thing. The reason that it was tried, you can find there's companies in New York and Philadelphia who used these bottles for a while, but they never caught on. But it's interesting in these various kind of odd closures. There's a glass ball, a marble inside there that's held by the pressure up against there. And you have to bang it. I mean, really bang it to open it. There we go. But the problem is you have to drink from the glass. Yep. There we go. That's the cod. And the thing was, if you try to drink this way, the marble falls down there and stops it from coming out. So you can't really see there, it stops it. So they added a design on the side. But that's one of the many different patents that were tried, and some were successful and some failed completely. Never caught on. The cod bottles became universally popular in Britain and Scotland, Ireland, and some of the British colonies back in the Caribbean. But this is a company, one of the few companies in the world. Can you see the bottle?
Mm-hmm.
It says Ramune. It's a Japanese company, one of the few places in the world that still use this bottle. See the stopper in there? I mean, oops. See I don't know if you can see the marble inside there. There's a marble.
Yeah, I can
But
see it.
anyway, that's just a little demonstration of the kind of odd experiments and different closures, because closures were important. They had to have good, reliable closures. They couldn't afford to lose stock from bad closures that would break or come loose or jar loose or pop loose from the pressure. You know, all these drinks, the beer and the sodas, were pressurized, and there must have been a certain amount of loss from it popping, as they say, popping the cork. You know.
Mm.
But anyway, I wanted to show you that. When I saw these in this Asian market, I was really amazed that anybody was still using the cod bottle. I was well aware of the English cod bottles because they're collectible, you know.
That's
But
where I had seen them with the Japanese drinks, the cod bottles. There's a couple
yeah,
more questions. Are
okay,
you ready? Do you want to take a couple
yeah,
more?
all right.
One of them was Klotz, a Trenton bottling company. Klotz, Klotz.
I'm not aware of it.
Okay,
I'm not.
that's something we can investigate. And then someone came in late, and she I don't think you discussed Smith and McGuire bottles, but she is under the
Oh yeah,
impression that
McGuire.
Smith was the brewer and McGuire was the bottler. Is that
Yeah, he
correct?
also had a connection. His father ran a hotel in Trenton. So he gave up the bottling business to run the hotel when his father died. Is she related to them? How does she know about Smith McGuire?
I don't know. We'll see if she puts something in the chat there. I'm going to go on to the next
Yeah, I
question while
have a
we wait to
picture of the
see.
bottle. I did have a picture of the bottle. That's a super rare bottle.
Oh,
That that.
she says it's her great grandfather.
Oh, really? Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. Well, good luck finding the bottle.
And then I have another question here. And this is interesting. I kind of thought this as well. The bottles seem to identify the bottler. So how did people know what the contents of the bottle were?
Oh, okay. I bought. Okay. They use labels too. The labels rarely survive. This is a label of a soda, and yeah, they had to have some kind of label.
Okay.
Sometimes the label was just a little strip, like a banner across the shoulder. That was common. I've seen those. The labels rarely survive. You occasionally see them, but they're pretty rare. Yeah.
Thank
It's
you.
nice when you can find an original bottle with the old label, you know. Maybe do you want to see the pictures of bottle digging before I go? You think that people would enjoy that?
I think if people want to stay and to see the, I'm getting,
Lisa
so it's
said
funny,
yes.
I'm getting chats. Yes. So yes, if you don't mind
Yes,
showing us, that
Lisa.
would be
Okay,
great.
but yeah, I have the Jamesburg dump there. She's from Jamesburg. So. Okay, well, I'll share and I'll show you. I have a. Okay, let's see here. Well, this is Jamesburg first. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can see your screen. So yeah,
Okay,
I can see
all right, good.
the land there.
This is an old city dump over at Jamesburg. Looks like a battlefield, but it's a different type of battlefield. The Battle of the Bottle, I guess. But that was that was famous among bottle collectors for the milk bottles. Milk bottle collectors cleaned up there. There was probably hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of milk bottles dug out of that dump. But there's even a few broken ones. You used to be able to go over there and just pick them up off the top of the ground, and people like this stuff was picked up. You know, that people didn't want it. These are Forescape Farms bottles. But digging is hard work. Here's a good example. You're digging through roots. In this case, it's a lot of ash. You never know what kind of chemicals and stuff been dumped in there. That dump was also burnt off a few times. So I have some good bottles that I found that were flattened by melting, which I always save those. They're kind of fun. Uh, there's some other bottles. There's a Deckers and another Forescape. Some broken stuff. It kind of gives you an idea of what a later dump. This dump dates from the late 30s, early 40s. This type of closure here on this milk bottle, I think, would date like 1942 or something. So it's about the period of this dump. It's an old city dump. There's another angle. And whiskey bottles. You find everything. It's a city dump. It's a nice old lampshade. Uh, there's a lemon squeezer, Coke bottles. You can find anything. You can find jewelry, so license plates, all kinds of personal household items, vinegar bottles. Most bottle diggers don't like to dig in these late dumps. They want the old stuff, but I'll go to, let me close this. The best dump for me was this dump. This is our first day of digging. It's what we've mostly Trenton sodas from the 1860s and 70s. That was a super day digging. Some of the balls that we found. This is a metal road down across from Market Fair and by Trader Joe's is a early dump there. Oh, that's a Trenton dump. This is one of the last balls. It's a Kearns ball. I just got to have my camera. Took a picture of it. Those are later bottles. Most of the bottles here dated 1870s and earlier. As shown, this is a Richardson, and it's a Richardson bottle, 1860s, 70s. There's some Morton bottles. There was a lot of G.A. Cole bottles from the 1850s and 60s. There's some pretty early stuff. We even found a piece of a Xavier Meyer bottle. You can see the Richardson on that. That's my friend Mark Kapik, and he's digging. Actually, that's at, I think, possibly the Jamesburg dump. We went down there one day. He didn't like that dump too much. This is an M.A. brew bottle from Cranberry. Somebody was practically laying on top of the ground. Some smart person walking along just smashed it with a rock. That bottle, with the last one I saw sell on the internet, sold for like $750, $740, something like that. So this is a Trenton dump. The amount of glass in some of these, this is a Trenton City dump, just south of downtown. The massive amounts of glass. This is we'll go back over here. Oh yeah, the most interesting thing, Lisa will remember this. She helped me get this out of here. The millstone. I was digging bottles around this for a long time. I thought it was just a rock, it was dumped into a depression, a hole. And people had dumped bottles. I did pretty good bottle digging there. And this thing was an annoyance. It was covered up with dirt, of course. I thought it was just a big, another annoying rock. And then one day I took my friend Mark down there, and we were digging along, and he says, this rock looks like it's carved. I said, what? Carved? And he noticed that it had those striations carved on it. And I started uncovering it, realized immediately it was a millstone. And there is an old mill site within almost, about a quarter of a mile away along Cranberry Brook there. That's probably one of the most interesting things I ever found bottle digging. And it's rare. It's the only millstone that I can attribute to a mill in Cranberry that survived for today. It's partly covered. It's only about, let's say, 60%, but that's better than nothing considering the rarity of it. Yeah. So thanks, with the help of local farmers, Alan Dancer, he got his farm equipment. We were able to pull that out of there with a backhoe, put it in his pickup truck, and we went tooling up Plainsboro Road with a millstone in the back. And it now resides happily over by the museum on Park Place. Hopefully it'll stay there. There we go. But that was a surprise. That tells a lesson about bottle digging. You never know what you'll find. Never. But anyway, I think hopefully. Is there any more questions before I stop sharing here?
I don't see any more coming in. But I want to thank you, Jerry. It was very informative. Your images are amazing. So thank you for the time that you took this evening. And I do want to thank, again, Bob Worsnack from the Hopewell Museum and the Hopewell Valley Historical Society, all of them for their support for this program, and Laura Narasik from our IT department for Mercer County Library System. And I have put some links in the chat to remind everyone to look at the upcoming events for Hopewell Valley Heritage Week and the library and the Historical Society and the museum. There's lots of great things happening. Jerry, again, thank you so much.
Okay.
Great program. Thank you.
I hope everyone got something out of it. So.
I
Thanks
think they
for all
did.
your work.